Hello and welcome to another exciting lecture for developmental psychology. In this lecture, we will cover the other half of socio-emotional development, infancy and early childhood, which is personality. This will be a relatively short lecture. So in this lecture, we're going to look at what is personality. We're going to look at self-perceptions. We're going to look at infant and self and temperament, and then finally finish up with childhood self-esteem. As we're going through, we're going to look at how the different theories in psychology view personality. So first we have to define what is personality. So personality can be loosely defined as an organized combination of attributes, motives, values, and behaviors unique to each individual. What does that mean? That is, personality is a relatively enduring disposition to the world around us. So these attributes, these motives, these values, these behaviors, they have to be relatively enduring. They have to be basically traits that don't tend to change, or if they do change, they change slowly over time. So when we're talking about personality, we're talking about what makes up who you are in an enduring sense, not in a transient or day by day, moment by moment, situation by situation sense. One component of personality is what's referred to as characteristic adaptations. These are times where you are going to have or act in a different way depending on the situation. This isn't, like I was saying on the previous slide, this isn't something where you would, let's say I gave you a situation and then I gave you the same situation tomorrow, that you would act different. That wouldn't be personality. You may act different, but that's not personality. Personality, though, does differ from situation to situation. So it's situation-specific and changeable ways in which people adapt to their roles and environments. You are going to act in a different way around your boss as you do your friends. You're going to act in a different way around your parents as you do your coworkers, that type of thing. And then we also have another component of personality is narrative identities. And these are unique and integrative life stories that construct and give ourselves identity and meaning. So narrative identities are your essential identity, or what identifies you. So when we are talking about the self, there is three components that we need to talk about. The first is the self-concept. So self-concept is going to be our perceptions, positive, negative, realistic, unrealistic, neutral, all of these, of our attributes and traits as a person. So our self-concept is our perception of ourself in both positive and negative ways. Our self-esteem, however, is our evaluation of our worth as a person. This tends to be based upon weighing those positive and negative self-perceptions that make up our self-concept. So self-esteem is our evaluation. If you have low self-esteem, you view yourself more negatively. If you have high self-esteem, you view yourself more positively. And then finally, we've got identity. And our identity is going to be just our sense of who we are and how we fit into society. And we'll talk about identity more later, specifically when we get to the adolescent stuff. So I'm not going to go into it more right now. Now, when we're talking about theories of personality, there's four main theories that go into examining personality. You've got psychoanalytic theory, which I am not going to look at here because just about everything with psychoanalytic theory has been disproven. Then you've got trait theory, which is the prevailing theory in personality. You've also got social learning theory, which influences trait theory to an extent. And finally, evolutionary theory, which, again, I'm not going to spend as much time on now because we had a full chapter talking about it before. So let's start with trait theory. So trait theory is the one that everyone knows about when it comes to personality. So trait theorists in general, what they do is construct scales of whatever it is, whatever trait they're looking at. In this case, we're looking at personality traits. So they construct personality scales. They use statistical techniques, specifically factor analysis, which is a real fun stats technique, to identify groupings of variables. So how this was originally done is over 1,000 questions were asked to a whole bunch of people. And then using factor analysis, these over 1,000 things, over 1,000 questions were broken down and grouped together, statistically grouped together into 5 specific groupings of items. Now these didn't have a name at first, they just came out to 5 groups. Then the early trait theorists that were looking at personality, they went through and they said, okay, well this group has this type of thing and this type of thing and this type of thing, so I'm going to call that extroversion. And this one has this type of thing, this type of thing, and this type of thing, so I'm going to call that neuroticism. So this is where we got the big 5. Ocean. So OCEAN, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I'm not going to go into these too much more. Just note, because the intro should have gone into them in depth, just note that trait theory looks at personality as being broken down into 5 different dimensions. As time has gone on, trait theory now looks kind of at 10 different dimensions. Each of these has 2 different subdimensions, but that's kind of not as relevant to this class. If you took a personality class, that'd be more relevant. Conversely, social learning theorists reject the notion of these universal stages of development that we go through. So whereas people like Piaget says we go through stages, social learning theorists, again, they reject these stages and they actually question the existence of enduring personality traits. So if personality is something that's enduring, a social learning theorist will say that since personality has to be relatively enduring, that personality really doesn't necessarily exist as we currently define it, because people can change their personality characteristics, their personality traits, rather rapidly. If you change the environment, if somebody packs up all their bags, moves across the country, leaves all of their friends, goes to a new place, new job, new friends, new everything, their personality will completely change. So if you're stuck in a rut with your personality, change your environment, you can change your personality. So from the social learning perspective, personality is just a set of behavioral tendencies, not relatively enduring traits, but tendencies shaped by interactions with people and specific social situations. And there is some strong evidence for this, that when your environment changes, your personality does change as well, except when you change from one environment to another that's basically the same thing. So that's the situations where it doesn't. So the last one is evolutionary theory, and we already talked about this. We already talked about life history theory, how early life factors such as low SES, indicators of mortality, changing father figure, things like that, affect later life outcomes. So by evolutionary theory, our personality is shaped by our early life factors. So it's a bit of a combination of social learning theory and trait theory, in that there's still these relatively enduring traits, but these relatively enduring traits are shaped by what happens to us early in life, not necessarily genetics. Next, let's look at the self throughout the lifespan. So we'll start with the infant and the emerging self. So infants develop this implicit sense of self through their perceptions of their bodies and actions, through the sensory motor stage of Piaget stages, where infants are learning about the environment, about their bodies, about everything around them, about how they can act on things external to their body. So in the first 2 to 3 months, infants discover that they can cause things to happen. They learn that when they move like their arms, they can touch something and cause things to happen. After 6 months, infants realize that they and other people are separate beings with different perspectives. So this is where the self starts to become an independent sense of self, and how we can share perspective. So it's relatively early infants get this sense of self. By 9 months, infants learn to be able to share perceptual experience by looking at the same object at the same time, shared gaze. So can use that as a method of social referencing. And by 18 months, infants fully recognize themselves as distinct individuals. They can recognize themselves in the mirror. They can recognize when what's in the mirror is not them, that type of thing. So it's something that starts relatively early. By 6 months, there's this really starting to form of self, and by 18 months, the full view of self has developed. Now, there's still some challenges to overcome, but there is now this full view of the self. One of the things with infancy is infants develop a categorical self. What do I mean by categorical self? A categorical self is where they categorize themselves based on characteristics or categories. So if you ask an infant to describe themselves, they're going to tell you their age. They're going to tell you that they're a boy or a girl. They're going to tell you who their parents are. They're going to tell you if they own a couch. These categories, these physical things. They're also going to do what's like me and what's not like me. So they're going to associate themselves and put themselves into categories with those that are like them, and not into categories with those that are not like them. As far as temperament, because again, temperament's this other part of self and personality, and temperament is the early precursors to what's going to be later personality. Infant, basically, temperament is early genetically based tendencies to respond in particular ways to events. And these are genetic predispositions. I don't have the video to show you guys, but there's a really interesting one where baby primates, that's a certain type of monkey, are basically adopted out to adoptive parents. And the babies come from either parents that are really anxious or really just confident. And the ones that come from mothers who are really confident and end up with mothers who are really anxious, they tend to be more anxious than they would if they were with their confident mother. But when put in stressful situations, they actually tend to be more confident. And the reverse is true as well. Babies who come from anxious mothers, they tend to be more confident when they're raised by a confident mother, but when they're put in a stressful situation, they act more in an anxious way. So even if this temperament that you have can be shaped by learning, it still has a genetic predisposition that comes out when there is a external threat. These categories of temperament are easy, difficult, slow to warm up, and behavioral inhibition, which we are going to watch a video for.
Babies appear to have unique temperaments or characteristic patterns of responding to the world at birth. These temperamental patterns are biologically based, and they strongly influence the interactions that babies have with their caregivers. Researchers have grouped these temperamental patterns into 3 broad categories. Some babies are easy, some are difficult, and some are slow to warm up. Easy babies exhibit a generally positive mood. They are easily comforted, eat and sleep on a regular schedule, and readily adapt to new situations.
This is Abby. She is 4 months old, and she eats every 2.5 to 3 hours. She is basically a really happy child. She sits in the summer seat, our exerciser, and our swing. She basically enjoys all of our activities here. She sleeps about 3 to 4 times a day, depending on when she comes in the morning. Basically, she is happy. She's a good child, and she enjoys being at school.
Difficult babies are more negative in mood, and they do not tolerate discomfort, such as hunger, well at all. They are irregular in their eating and sleeping schedules and can be very hard to comfort when upset.
You think I can turn you over? Hmm?
Slow to warm up babies are moody and slower to adapt to change. They are often characterized as fussy, showing more negativity and mood than easy babies, but eventually warming up as caregivers persist with attempts to comfort them.
Hayden's temperament is, I believe, very easygoing. He's very jovial. He's very playful, very inquisitive. He tends not to get too whiny unless he's tired, but he tends to hold out as long as he can until he gets tired. So he's a good-natured baby. In the very beginning, because he was so easygoing, we continued with our lifestyle the way that we always had. We went to dinner, we went to the Cape every weekend, you know, we went out to visit friends at parties, and we always brought him with us because he was so easygoing.
She's a great baby. She's very laid back. She's a happy baby. She's very content. She's, you know, all around, she's just she's a well-tempered baby. I've never had a problem with her, ever. You know, being just the typical fussiness. I mean, she's tired, cranky, needs her diaper change, that type of thing. Other than that, she's happy, plays. She's pretty independent too. You know, you can leave her do what you need to do and she'll play by herself.
Sleeps well?
Yep, she goes to bed around 7 and sleeps till about 5:30. So she does really well. Napping during the day, 1 good nap a day, sometimes 1.5. You know, she'll take like an hour nap around 3 or 4.
Babies with different temperaments require different types of parenting, and it is important to note that responsive parenting is predictive of long-term positive outcomes, regardless of temperament.
Very interesting video on temperament. And again, it didn't really look at the last one of the temperaments, which is behavioral inhibition. So the last thing I'll just talk about with that is behavioral inhibition tends to come from abuse. So if babies with behavioral inhibition, those are ones who have been abused and they basically shut down. Now let's transition into childhood, looking at the elaborating sense of self. So by toddlerhood, by about 2, toddlers use personal pronouns. They say I, me, my, mine. They when referring to the self, and you when addressing another person. And that categorical self that's in early infancy really starts to shine at this point in time. So toddlers show this emerging categorical sense of self when they describe themselves, especially in terms of age and sex. Then into preschool, the self-concept becomes more concrete and physical. So this, like I said, is when if you ask them, they'll tell you about their dog when they're describing themselves. They'll tell you about their house. They'll tell you about their couch, different things like that. So the preschooler self-description focuses on physical characteristics, possessions, physical activities that they do, even accomplishments. So accomplishments like that, like they got an A or they got a good grade, maybe even their preferences, but it's very categorical, concrete, and physical. Into grade school, though, the psychological and social qualities start to become more prominent. Meaning, kids will describe themselves in ways basically based on their social, they're friendly, they're nice, their psychological qualities, like they're funny, So some of them, like describing their enduring qualities using personality terms now, such as funny and smart. Their identities will start to define themselves as part of their social unit rather than just the physical construct, their possessions, and where they live. So they'll start, when they're describing who they are, they'll start describing their group of friends, things like that. At this point in time, they become more capable of social comparison. So they use information on how they compare with other children to evaluate themselves. So when describing themselves, they'll include comparisons, things like that. And when looking at things like self-esteem, social comparison becomes a really big component because social comparison is a big component of self-esteem. We don't just base our self-esteem on ourself, we base our self-esteem on our social comparison or how we compare to others with that sense of self. So when we look at whether our characteristics are positive or negative, that comes with a social comparison component. So the accuracy of children's self-evaluations does increase over the elementary years because early on the evaluations are very fantastical, very fantasy-like. When you ask a kid what they want to be when they grow up, they could say a wizard. But it does change as they grow older and it becomes more realistic, even if at this point in time there still is a pretty big gap. You ask them what they want to be when they grow up, they could still say at this point in time, star in the NFL. Well, 99.9999% of kids are not going to do that. So even if there's a large percentage saying they are. So that might be an eventual thing they can do, and it shouldn't be discouraged. But the point is that as time goes on, the accuracy of self-evaluations decreases or increases. So the gap between what's referred to as the ideal self and the desired self shrinks. So children form a strong sense of what they should be like, this ideal self, rather than what they want to be like. Let's look at a video.
Children show changes in their self-concepts with age. Preschool children like Todd and Christopher are likely to describe themselves in terms of physical characteristics, possessions, and behaviors.
I play in the dirt and I put cement and I make a building. My room has dinosaurs in it, the dinosaur room. Mine is a dinosaur room and my mom's is a girl room, and my dad's is in the middle, and mine's on the left side, and my mom's on the right side. And I have a dog, cat, fish, hermit crabs, and some couches, 2 couches, and a big TV, and some toys that get lost behind the TV.
In middle childhood, children begin to describe themselves in less concrete terms. Like Rachel, Stephanie, and Ricardo, they may describe themselves in terms of group membership.
I'm 9, go to the Marlboro Intermediate School. My favorite color is purple. I'm in 2nd grade and I have one brother and I like to go swimming. I'm in the 4th grade. I'm 9 years old, and I go to the Weston House.
In middle childhood, children also begin to describe themselves along more psychological dimensions, as illustrated by 7-year-old Joseph and 8-year-old Jenny.
Can you tell me 3 things about yourself?
I like school a lot.
Very good.
And I love art, and I like helping people. Nice, smart, creative.
So interesting video that shows how it goes throughout, and then when we talk about adolescence, we'll look at what changes in adolescence. Let's finish up just talking about self-esteem in childhood. So in childhood, self-esteem does become more differentiated and it becomes more multidimensional. In early childhood, self-esteem is based on only a few things. Are their needs being met? Do they feel like they are loved? That type of thing. As they get older, competence starts to become important. So preschoolers, they distinguish between two aspects of self-esteem. Their physical and cognitive competence, how good they are at sports and sport-type games, how good they are at tag, various different things like that, as well as how good they are at their cognitive abilities. So when the school activities that happen, or even when you're talking about playing games and the cognitive abilities that go into that. So that is the first component of self-esteem in childhood. The second is social adequacy or social acceptance, personal and social acceptance. How well do they get along with others, and how well do others get along with them? Can children at this age form friendships? And they're assessing themselves, and those children that have difficulty forming friendships tend to have lower self-esteem. Unfortunately, it's a reciprocal process in that those with lower self-esteem then have a harder time forming friendships. Then by the mid-elementary school years, children split it up instead of into two broad categories into 5 or more specific categories. First is scholastic competence. Scholastic competence. So how good they are at school. This is one of the things that makes up self-esteem. At this point in time, all kids tend to try in school. It's later on that those who have low scholastic competence, I keep saying social, but low scholastic competence, they have low self-esteem in this domain, that they pull away from school in order to reduce the cost to self-esteem that having low scholastic competence brings them. The next is social acceptance, how good they make friends. So that comes back to the social adequacy, so how good they make friends. This is where those who have trouble making friends will become loners because they are trying to bridge that self-esteem gap and reduce the loss of self-esteem from not being socially accepted. Behavioral conduct as well, so how well they behave behaviorally. And this is where, again, some kids will stop caring about how they how they act behaviorally, how their behavior affects things. This is where you'll get people like the class clown or the bully, things like this. They're kind of using this as a way to reduce the self-esteem loss. Athletic competence, again, this is in sports and various things like sports. Those who are bad at it, poor at it, tend to hate sports. It starts really early in this hating sports because, again, one of the main things when it comes to self-esteem is people do things to reduce negative effects, negative consequences, or negative impacts on self-esteem. And then finally, physical appearance. Not as much can be done here, but some will care more about appearance and some will care less about appearance based on this. So that's just something to consider when you're looking at it, is how these 5 different competences work and how people view these based on early childhood occurrences and how that affects them later in life. So let's look at these influences on childhood self-esteem. The biggest one is going to be heredity, so genetics. Those with parents who have high self-esteem tend to have high self-esteem themselves. Those with high self-esteem tend to those with good heredity for high self-esteem tend to put themselves into social situations that increase their self-esteem. General competence. This can come from heredity, but it can also come from effort and learning. Many of the things on that previous list that are the competences can actually be learned. However, once a kid starts giving up on something, it becomes very, very difficult for them to become competent on it later. Social feedback is one, so the feedback they get from others. And again, this is where someone with good heredity can put themselves into positive social feedback systems. And then the final one is secure attachment to warm, which we're going to talk about when we talk about parents later, but warm is more open and accepting. Authoritative, which is another thing parenting style we'll talk about later. Authoritative are parents who are enforce rules consistently, but also are willing to include the children in the decision-making process. But these are things we'll talk about later when we're talking about parenting styles. The important thing is, as we talked about secure attachments, it really does have, that secure attachment really does have a strong influence on positive self-esteem. Okay, that was a relatively short lecture. Why is that such a short lecture? Because a lot of the self and personality stuff is going to be picked up in adolescence, and we're going to talk about it much more in adolescence. So we looked at personality, we looked at self-perceptions, we looked at the infant, self and temperament, and finished with the transition into self-esteem and looking at a personality a little bit into childhood. Thanks, come on back.